The Grattan Institute says Australia is increasingly living beyond its means and needs to adapt as the mining boom slows. The Institute's Chief Executive, John Daley, is addressing the Press Club in Canberra on this issue today, and he's joined us to give us a sneak peek. No, you can tell us all about it beforehand, can't you? Go on. Spoiler alert, spoiler for all of those tuning into the Press Club today. Nice to see you.
It's lovely to be here again.
What do you want the new government to do?
Well, in many ways, what the old government needed to do as well. The budget pressures that Australian governments face haven't changed simply because there's been a change in government. We still are living beyond our means. We have been running deficits in times when the economic cycle meant that we really should have been running surpluses. We continue to promise more things, and the Coalition obviously has a slightly different set of promises, but it's still a large set of numbers. In the long run, one of the biggest of those will be disability care, and that's not in the numbers yet. And then, of course, the biggest one by far is ultimately around health. Yeah. We've seen very rapid growth in health spending over the last decade. We didn't notice that because of the mining boom, and if it keeps going at the same rate, we're going to see much bigger deficits going forwards.
OK, so what does the new government need to do in the short term to deal with that budget emergency?
Well, if you've got a structural budget deficit, it's not actually so much about what you do in the short term in terms of results. You do have to act in the short term to start reining in spending and probably looking at the taxation side as well. And there's a huge number of things that we could do. There's a relatively small number of things that are big enough to make a difference. And, of course, all the ones that are big enough to make a difference are things that are going to be politically very difficult.
Yes. So, in your mind, there's no doubt there is a budget emergency. That was the rhetoric used before the election. Is there one?
Well, your listeners will have to tune in at 12:30 to the ABC News 24 for the Press Club to find out whether there's a real emergency.
Nice.
You sneak. You're not going to give us that headline this morning.
No, but I'm happy to give News 24 a plug.
All right. Well, I'm going to try and interpret around the edges. It does seem though that you're indicating, if not the rhetoric of a budget emergency, and maybe you're going to say that there is one, that we're in the kind of serious position where we haven't actually turned a structural deficit and also the fabulous amounts of money that this country is capable of making into something that actually shores up our wealth for the long term. Is that your contention?
Well, that's exactly right. And we kind of throw around terms like structural deficit without thinking about what it means. Yeah. A structural deficit means that after you've taken into account the mining boom, after you've taken into account the financial circumstances of the financial crisis or whatever it might be, we are living beyond our means. And that's where we've been for the last 5 or 6 years. If you take away if you take away the mining boom, if you take away the financial circumstances, we've been running deficits in the order of 2, 3, 4% of GDP. So it's really quite a substantial structural problem that we've got.
You talked about the sprawling health budget. Should that be one issue that the government should look at trimming?
Well, one of the toughest things about our health budget is that we actually have one of the most efficient health systems in the world. There may well be lots of scope to do better, but we spend about middle of the pack for the OECD, and we get some of the best results. So we have a very good health system. Figuring out how to take substantial cost out of it is in fact very difficult. The problem is not that we're wasting our money in health. The problem is that we're spending a lot and getting results for it. Now we have to figure out who is going to pay for it.
Right, OK. Well, what other areas there of health is too challenging to look at?
Well, I'm not suggesting you take it off the table, but you certainly you need to understand it's not going to be easy. The other big areas of government spending are welfare, education, infrastructure and defence. So you take all of those together, that's 2/3 of what governments spend money on. And what it does mean is if you're not talking about those things, it's very difficult to believe that you're serious.
But they're surely the things that it is a country's job to fund and to pay for, and a government's job to fund as well.
Absolutely, but it's also a government's job to make sure over the medium run that it balances its books.
Yeah.
All right.
And there comes tax, and yes, that's another subject of another conversation.
Indeed.
OK, well, you can keep your headlines until News 24 gets in and broadcasts it. Good to talk to you this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you.